Every town has its urban legends. An unnatural abomination with the body of an animal and the head of a human lurking the forests. A bridge said to curse any who stand under it in the dead of night. A lurking serial killer continuing his crimes from beyond the grave. You might be familiar with the Hook Man, a chilling tale about a young couple finding a man's hooked hand hanging on the back of their car. Or tales about mysterious clowns being sighted in the woods outside of suburban areas. Over time, the truth behind an urban legend will become muddled, and the original story might change countless times before emerging in its present form. They might entertain us, they sometimes might even scare us, but all urban legends feed on the tiny sliver that they might be true. That voice inside your head telling you that it might not be just a story designed to scare you, and that there are some aspects of the world that are truly unknown. And most of all, you, the average person, can get caught up in this world, forced into it against your will by pure chance. A deranged killer, an unknown sea creature lurking in a lake, a curse, a poorly understood creature never before seen by science. All of these images conjure up fear, but when combined with the personalized nature of an urban legend, which adds familiar places, names, and situations to the mix, it's no wonder why these stories take off. Rodney Hallow's town, the name of which has been scrubbed from all documentation by the Foundation, was no different in that it had its own share of urban legends. Even though the town's name is lost due to the SCP Foundation wiping its name from official documentation, know that Rodney was an average teenager, living an average life, and doing average things a person his age might do. And that included taking his friends up on dares that he might regret later, dares pertaining to those urban legends. Kids daring one another to do something like this is nothing new. Whether it's saying Bloody Mary 3 times in a row before a bathroom mirror in the dark, or taking a trip to an abandoned building and staying the night there, you should be undoubtedly familiar with how these things work, and how easy it is to get a susceptible young mind to do them. Who wants to risk an encounter with the supernatural? Well, people who don't mind to do them. Well, people who don't want to chicken out in front of their friends, of course. Getting cursed by a ghost, or the more realistic possibility of accidentally injuring yourself while exploring an abandoned area is nothing compared to the feeling of satisfaction that comes from looking cool in front of your friends. At least, that rings true when you're 14 years old. But Rodney Hollow was above that. He was, more than anything else, a scaredy cat to his core. No amount of peer pressure could make him fold, because his fears outweighed his social capital. If Rodney was afraid of it, his friends knew that there was no chance of getting him near it. In a way, it was admirable. He could be offered money, food, literally anything he wanted, and if Rodney didn't want to do it, he wouldn't. Not just that, but he felt like he physically couldn't. It was like every bone in his body would freeze up. His heart would start beating intensely, and he would internally panic. It was a regular feeling of fear, sure, but Rodney felt it often. A fear of exams, a fear of the future, snakes, spiders, open windows at night. Rodney was always overthinking things, and his fears were well known among the small circle he associated himself with. Naturally, Rodney's friends acted their age and spent a lot of time trying to come up with new and exciting ways to scare the daylights out of the poor kid. This could be playing pranks on him, giving Rodney phone calls from hidden numbers, or trying to get him to watch horror movies. It was getting to the point where Rodney was more annoyed than anything else, and he was beginning to heavily reconsider with who he hung out with. But if there was one person who could convince Rodney to do something, it was Claire, a girl in his class he had a tiny bit of a crush on. And by a tiny bit, we mean that Rodney was so willing to make himself look good in front of Claire that he willingly accompanied his friends to a supposedly haunted house located in a rural area just outside of town. This was Rodney's town's urban legend, and while it wasn't well known, this broken-down house was slowly gaining a reputation among the town's youth as a gateway between the realm of the living and the dead. The lore varied depending on who you asked, but it was said to be haunted by the spirit of a puppet maker who experimented with making puppets out of human bodies. His reclusive nature and isolated lifestyle meant that his crimes and experiments went unnoticed until his death, when law enforcement seized the house and cleared out hundreds of mutilated, half-human, half-wooden puppet creatures. Of course, this was all just hearsay, and there was no actual proof beyond what was said at Rodney's lunch table. But as seasoned viewers of this channel know, in the world of the SCP Foundation, there is always a kernel of truth in even the slightest story of the unknown. The outline of Rodney's dare was simple. He and Claire would have to spend an hour inside the house alone, while his friends waited for him outside of it. Pretty great friends, huh? Under any other circumstances, Rodney would have refused to even leave his house that night. But the prospects of looking good in front of Claire were too tempting for even the scariest of scaredy cats to pass up. Besides, if he played it cool, he could use this as a way to talk to Claire and actually get to know her a bit better. They'd have a whole hour together. Just an hour inside a dark, dilapidated house occupied by a puppet maker serial killer's ghost. That's all. Still, Rodney clenched his fist and grit his teeth, determined to shake off his reputation as a wimp. The house stood before him, and Claire stood beside him. They moved forward together, much to the chuckling and stifled laughter of the kids behind them, and with a forceful jiggling of the locked doorknob using a makeshift lockpick made out of a paperclip and a piece of metal, they entered the house. The inside was dark, but that much was to be expected. As soon as the two entered, the door slammed itself shut, and a clicking sound was heard, indicating that it was now locked. Immediately, Rodney knew something was wrong. He had a feeling he would see some unexplained things, but he didn't expect one to occur immediately after he entered. The door just slammed itself shut. Claire turned back and attempted to open it, but she had no luck. Rodney, in what he felt was a smooth move, told her to calm down, and that when the hour was eventually up, they could just break through a window to get out. This seemed to work, and Claire hesitantly calmed herself. The interior of the house was old, done in a Baroque style unfitting of the unimpressive exterior. A spiraling staircase, a few paintings, armchairs in front of a fireplace. It was clear that whoever lived here, if they didn't have money, they certainly had access to skilled craftsmanship. There were faint pockets of light in the distance, coming from candles positioned sparsely throughout the home. The two began to explore, not content to stay in any one place for too long. The frightened duo came to an ornate yet run-down kitchen. Their footsteps creaked with every movement, but when they stopped, they noticed that the stepping sounds didn't. Rodney began to panic as he was used to. Keeping a cool head in this situation was next to impossible. Slow stepping sounds coming from various parts of the house. They moved closer, practically clinging to each other. If Rodney wasn't so scared, this would have been an ideal situation, but he couldn't even appreciate it. The footsteps didn't grow louder, they just increased in number. Slow-moving steps coming from above, below, and beside them. And then in the distance, from the poorly lit hallway in front of them, Rodney saw a shape. A jerkily moving, barely visible shape, but it was approaching them. Claire saw it too, and the two ran out of the kitchen and back to the front of the house. They banged on the door begging and screaming for their friends to let them back out, but there was no response. They tried to break open a window, but they physically found themselves unable to damage the house. It was as if they wanted to protect it instead of damage it, even though both of them knew they absolutely wanted to break a window and run out of the house as fast as possible. The figure was approaching, and the footsteps didn't stop either. It was then that Rodney caught a glimpse of the figure that was trailing them, a picture only visible due to the brief flash of candlelight. It was a sunken, hollowed-out corpse, with button eyes and rust-brown skin. As soon as it moved beyond the candle, the entity was difficult to see again, but Rodney was unable to scrub that brief image from his mind. It jerked towards them, slow step by slow step, and then it lunged forward at a frightening, fast, unnatural speed. The two screamed. Rodney fell to the floor, passed out in fear, and then everything went quiet. Rodney and Claire were just another disappearance that had a connection to that abandoned house, and when the local police force launched an investigation, they compiled over 20 cases of teenagers from ages 12 to 17 that went missing as a result of visiting the abandoned home over the past decade. A small team of law enforcement were dispatched to inspect and investigate the home in person, but they did not return. It was at this point when the incident caught the attention of the SCP Foundation, who overtook the investigation and launched a massive cover story that involved a mass amnesticization of law enforcement officers and relatives of the missing persons, as well as a planting of a memetic agent in the area that induced brain patterns that would discourage the town's residents from talking about or spreading the urban legend of the house. The Foundation quickly established containment procedures and a security perimeter was set up around the house. After a cursory preliminary batch of research and testing, the house was decidedly anomalous and was given the designation of SCP-1098-RU, labeled as such due to the investigation taking place in Russia and being handled by the Russian branch of the SCP Foundation. SCP-1098-RU's containment procedures, on top of the cover story that was put into place to discourage and suppress the spread of the urban legend, were effective in deterring civilians from entering the area. Originally, the city administration had proposed to destroy and dismantle the house years ago, but the building's demolition was constantly postponed by bureaucratic red tape. The entirety of the area was fenced in and patrolled by an armed security detail at all hours, with the guards shifting positions every 6 hours. If any civilians attempted to enter, they would be arrested and interrogated, with the use of amnestics permitted. If anything regarding SCP-1098-RU were to change, the guards would have to report it to Site 7 and wait for further instruction. From the Foundation's research, it was determined that SCP-1098-RU was a difficult anomaly to analyze. The house's primary anomalous effect was a protective one. All of the windows and the front door of SCP-1098-RU were automatically locked, and if someone attempted to enter the house via physically damaging one of these spots, or anywhere else on the house, they would find themselves unable to do so. Instead, they would feel motivated to protect SCP-1098-RU and prevent any damage to it. This, of course, wouldn't override any other pre-existing feelings toward the house, so as we saw in Rodney's case, this can result in a conflict of interest where the victim wanted to escape but was unable to due to the house's protective trap. This effect is only active when a person is within at least 50 meters of SCP-1098-RU, which explains why the plans for the house's demolition were plotted, but actually unable to be carried out. The only way to enter SCP-1098 is the house's front door, through use of a lockpicking device or another way to break the door's lock. Upon entry, the door will close automatically, lock itself from the outside, and is unable to be opened for the next hour. Attempts to break into the house before this hour is through are futile, as the anomaly's protective measures will trigger in order to prevent damage coming from the house. The home's origins are presently unknown, as the Foundation is still investigating them. But the urban legend of the puppet maker who turned his victims into puppets may hold some credence. SCP-1098-1 is an entity that has been nicknamed the Master of Puppets, and you're about to see why. But the entity is a self-containing spirit, believed to be the cause of most of the anomalous phenomenon within the house. The Foundation hasn't found a way to contact or research the -1 entity beyond observing the brief appearances of it during testing, so information on the anomaly is limited to what's been observed, and that would be candles that are unable to be extinguished or replaced, strange glows of light emerging from the cracks in sealed windows and walls, hallucinations based on the fears of the victims trapped inside, and the sound of slow approaching steps from throughout the house. These steps are unable to be recorded using audio devices, but the Foundation has reason to believe they're produced by the entity itself. Still, there's a lot of mystery surrounding SCP-1098. Where did it come from? What is the SCP-1098-1 entity? And most importantly, where do the corpses of its victims go? That one is easy to answer. The bodies of those who die inside SCP-1098 will be preserved by the entity and altered to take on the appearance of puppets. Their eyes will be removed, and long, thick threads will be sewn into their extremities. But what does SCP-1098-RU need these puppets for? A look into the Foundation's initial research documents regarding the house may provide the answer. The Foundation's exploration of SCP-1098-RU occurred shortly after the object was put into containment, and remains the primary source of information on how the anomaly functions and how its intricacies work. The first test involved a remote-controlled drone equipped with recording equipment, the Foundation's safest way to observe hostile, unknown, anomalous territory from a distance. The drone entered and was quickly locked inside the house. As it proceeded, it found several damaged, altered corpses of missing persons in various rooms of the house. The bodies were missing their eyes, and all had thick strings sewn onto them, with stitch marks on the chest and face areas. Strangely, the bodies weren't decomposed at all. despite some of the corpses being identified as people who disappeared months ago. The drone survey also found several objects of interest: a set of surgical knives, threads, needles, and a prosthetic artificial eye. While the drone didn't detect the -1 entity, Foundation researchers could only speculate as to where and what these objects were used for, and by who. The second test involved sending a D-Class personnel into the building. He was supplied with a flashlight and recording equipment, and was tasked with re-examining the first floor of the house. The only difference the D-Class observed from the drone exploration was that the candles were clearly replaced by newer ones, indicating that someone had changed them. Footsteps were heard throughout the home, sometimes in areas that the D-Class had just emerged from. Upon re-entering one room to investigate, the D-Class was ordered to take a surgical knife back to command for further study. However, as soon as he lifted the knife, communication immediately cut off, and the Foundation was unable to re-establish contact. A third test was held shortly after to determine what happened to the D-Class, as well as explore the second floor of SCP-1098, this time using another remote-controlled drone. The drone found that the house on its second floor had a sewing workshop, filled with all of the materials you would expect to find in such, including threads, machinery, and tools. Multiple corpses were found, all dressed in 18th century clothes, their eyes replaced with artificial ones, and with strings sewn into their bodies. Upon the drone's return, communication was cut off yet again, and when the hour period was up and the house's door opened, there was no sign of it anywhere. The fourth test into SCP-1098 involved another D-Class personnel, who was instructed to attempt to leave the building before an hour passed. After entering, the D-Class reported a throbbing headache and immediate pressure in his ears. He reported that someone was crying in the farthest room on the first floor, but the equipment couldn't pick anything up. After entering, he reported that he saw a little girl wearing an old-fashioned dress, and she was dancing and crying, being pulled upward into motion by the strings that were sewn onto her back. These strings on camera were completely invisible to the Foundation, leading the command to believe that the D-Class was experiencing hallucinations. The D-Class simply stood and observed, almost transfixed by the girl. He remarked that it seemed like the strings stretched on forever, and that there was no ceiling, even though the Foundation could clearly see the ceiling of the room on the camera. After 5 minutes of silence and observation, a startling clap was heard as the camera's visuals cut out, and then a male voice, but not that of the D-Class, spoke.
In perseveture spretium.
When translated from Latin to English, it read, "The performance must be paid for." After this, the Foundation put a stop to all further experimentation with SCP-1098-RU, content with the data they had gained. Until the Foundation gains more information about SCP-1098 and the mysterious entity inside, sending more resources in will only result in them meeting a gruesome demise. Until then, they can only speculate about the true nature of the entity, known as the Master of Puppets. Now go check out SCP-2696 Haunted Victorian Mansion and SCP-4153 Haunted House Horror. It came from Site 9 for more anomalous haunted houses from SCP Explained.